way to encounter, approach Genesis 2 through 11 is to recognize what Moses passed down to the children of Israel was where they came from. Now, all the way back to the first century when Christians began to receive the Hebrew Scriptures, they interpreted this as their history, as human history. What we need to recognize, and so far not done in the theological travel, is that these passages is important. Genesis 2 through 11, that's from Adam through the flood, Tower of Babel, to the beginnings of Abraham, history of the Adamites, Semites, Israelites, Jews, Greeks, and some others in the ancient Near East. Now, before I get too much further, I want to just say this. Some of you may all of a sudden start to look at your own ancestry and say, well, wait a minute. Maybe my ancestors don't come from this particular line of people. Is that any problem for me? I want to put that aside because as you remember, when Christ charged his apostles, disciples, and told them to go preach the gospel to every creature, leaving no doubt that everybody was eligible for the kingdom and that your birth made no difference. Now, the King James translators, when they approached the King James Version that they turned out in 1611, they used the same mindset. Nothing had changed. They knew nothing about geology, archaeology, or anything about the history of the ancient Near East. So when they translated the Aramaic and the Hebrew into English, they did it with that same point of view. So it appears to us, even today when we read the King James Version, that it is human history. Now one might say, well, okay, but we have more modern versions today. We have the American Standard Version, we have the Revised Standard Version, we have the New Jerusalem Bible, we have the NIV. Certainly these newer translations have discovered that there's some errors in the King James Version and they filtered them out. The difficulty is that the tradition has been established on a flawed translation, and the tradition has never changed. So these newer translations, even though there's more modern terminology, the tone and timbre is still the same. And so as we go through this, I would like you to see how the history of the ancient Near East is intertwined with Genesis and an integral part of Genesis. It's something that we really can't overlook. Today we have two camps. I started to use the word armed camps, but let's say rival camps. We have conservatives on one side, we also have liberals amongst biblical exegetes. Now from the conservative side, they will say, well, the Bible is God's word, it's to be taken literally. And then they rely on translation, they make a worse interpretation, and then try to beat scientists over the head with it. In my estimation, that's counterproductive. On the liberal side, they will say, well, wait a minute. Genesis isn't to be taken as history as we think of history. It's more like allegory, or it's poetry, or it's tradition. It's something other than how we look at real history. Well, as oftentimes is the case, the truth is between the extremes. Genesis can be taken literally. It is the literal history of the ancient Near East, of a particular line of people, the line of the covenant.